Well, good morning.
Good morning.
This is our last day together. Have a few people coming in. Well, let's go to the next slide. That's just the schedule. What we're going to do today. Oh well, he'll catch up. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about. Microphone. Yes. Have to remind me every morning. All right, better. No. Hello? Okay, that's better. All right. Today we're going to talk about accessing and experiencing the larger consciousness system. And we'll talk about it and then we'll do it. So between now and lunchtime, we're going to talk about it. And then from lunchtime, I guess after lunch, we're going to do it. And then we're going to have questions until we have to leave or something else starts or whatever. We'll just do questions as long as we can. Okay? So next slide and then the next slide. Okay. So what I'd like to accomplish today is just give you some information that'll help you understand your experience, your limitations, kind of where you are, what you can expect if you try to explore the larger consciousness system. The first question is, that people ask is, can I do this? Can everybody do it? And the answer, of course, is yes. Everybody can do it. You are consciousness. As consciousness, this is your, this is what you do. This is what you are. You're consciousness. You interact. We are all netted. You pass information, you receive information, you interpret information, and you have access to the entire larger consciousness system. That's consciousness. Now, you notice in the slide I say, yes, theoretically you can do it. But that's like saying, theoretically, anybody, can be a good pianist or can, run a marathon. Well, yeah, theoretically, if you trained and you practiced, you could do those things. But few people do. So if you want to, then you're going to have to spend some time. And the main thing to keep in your mind is patience. If you learn to play a piano, you wouldn't sit down at the piano, and if it didn't work in the first week, if you weren't a concert pianist by the end of the first week, you give up, right? Nobody would do that. You know it's going to take some time, and at the end of the first 5 years, maybe you'd be good enough, but not good enough to play professionally, but good enough to play a piano. But it takes time. This is the same way. It takes years to develop these understandings and skills and appreciation, and mostly it's a matter of experience and focus. And if you learn to play the piano, you wouldn't do it by playing it for an hour every other week. You'd never really get there. You have to be regular, and it has to be kind of a daily, or at least every other daily sort of thing. You have to keep working at it. And the same goes for getting rid of your fear, growing up, or accessing the larger conscious system. Now that last bullet is a very important point. Is this necessary? Does anybody have to do anything paranormal? Is out of body or seeing auras or any of that stuff important? No, not important to your ability to get rid of your fear, lower your entropy, and do what you're supposed to be doing here. Not important at all. So you don't have to have these experiences. You don't have to go into the larger consciousness system. It's an extra. It's something that people often want to do in order to prove to themselves that they're living in a larger reality that's just beyond this physical. And that's why we go into it here. Because a lot of people, particularly those that are more left brain, want personal experience, logic. They have to have that Because if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. Otherwise, you're stuck as a believer on the outside without any personal experience. So if you're left-brained, that's important. If you're right-brained, that's not so important. If you're right-brained, you just intuit the answer. You understand. You get the big picture without logical process. Right-brained people just understand because they do. They see and intuit big pictures. Left-brained people need to have the personal experience. So a lot of this is for the left-brained people to go get their experience. Now, the right-brained people can do this more easily. They don't have to practice so hard because they're more natural with it, but they also don't need to go so much. But the important thing is you don't have to do any of this. This is beside the point. What you have to do is get rid of that fear, become love, grow up, lower your entropy. That's your mission here. And you don't need to experience the larger conscious system to do that. You can do that perfectly well, right here in this reality. Okay. Another question would be of balance. Sometimes people will get into the larger consciousness system, those experiences, and get so enamored of it that they're spending 4 or 5 hours a day in meditation state and exploring and doing that sort of thing. That's out of balance. That's not a good idea. That's too much. You're here in this reality frame because this is where the action is. This is the fast track. Here's where you can learn. Here's where you get the challenges to make good choices. Now, yes, you make choices there too, and it is another reality frame in which you can learn, but this is the one that is the most challenging. Remember we talked before about somebody sits in a cave, how much can they learn without being tested, without having the experience to verify what they think is true about their quality. See, it's a problem. So here's where the verification is. Here's where the rubber meets the road, and here's where you need to spend most of your time focused and engaged and interacting with other people. So the larger consciousness system is a side trip, not the main trip. Okay. The other thing is that as you grow up and lower your entropy and become love, exploring the larger reality becomes easier and easier. And inasmuch as you have fear, ego, expectations, all those things, it gets harder and harder. So if you have a problem with it, if you're trying to do this and it just doesn't seem to work out for you, I would suggest that you just let it be for a while and start working on that fear and working on that ego. Work on that. When that gets to be small, the larger conscious system exploration gets to be easy. So we don't want to get the cart in front of the horse. And I tell people that, but still there's a whole bunch of you out there going, yeah, but I want to do this. But I really want to do this. So we're going to do it anyway, but I'm giving you just a little context here. Don't get carried away with it. And really, what you should do is get rid of the fear first. Because if you get out into the larger consciousness system and you're fearful, you'll find a lot of scary stuff out there. You'll manifest your fears. So you really want to get rid of the fear before you go would be a good idea. That being said, those of you who want to go are going to go anyway. So let's go on and see how we can help that. Okay, next slide. How does one go about it? Okay, well, as we said, the first thing is meditation. The first thing is you have to clear all the noise out of your consciousness. Just get rid of the noise. You need clarity. You need stillness. You need no thoughts. You need to be able to put that intellect to bed and not let it constantly be chattering to you. Okay. Explore, experiment, practice, have patience, stick to it, don't give up easily. And in the beginning, collect evidential data. That's your purpose for going, collect evidential data, which means you have to do a couple of things. You have to think before what you're going to do, where you're going to go, and is it something that will create data that then you can check up later and see whether that data is accurate. In other words, are you going to collect something that normally you wouldn't be able to get, that you wouldn't have, and then can you go check and see that what you got is indeed accurate? Okay. So those are the kinds of experiments you need to do. Just kind of traveling around isn't very evidential. Good. So first we have to focus on collecting evidence. Otherwise we're not going to convince ourselves that there's something real here. So focus on those kinds of things. And the two things that are the easiest to do and lend themselves to evidence are the healing and the remote viewing. Because there you can go check and see, are you having an effect? Did you diagnose the illness right? Or did I see the target? They're very evidential. So those are good things to practice with for evidence. If you go out and have a conversation with some non-physical being and you talk about philosophy or something, that's not going to be evidential. So though you can do that in the beginning until you really get a good sense that this is real, I'd say try to stick to evidential things. Okay, there's no shortcut. No way to get there without doing the work. Which jumps us down to the very last bullet. Drugs are generally counterproductive. So there is actually a way to get there without doing the work, and that would be drugs, but they're of no value. Actually, they're of negative value. The reason is, if you don't get there under your own steam in your own way by learning and growing on the way, then the drug isn't doing anything except taking you on a joyride. The drug is like going to the carnival and getting on the roller coaster. It's a gee whiz, oh wow, but then when it's over, it's over. It's done. What have you learned? How have you grown? How are you better for that experience? You're not. You don't grow up by having experiences. You grow up by getting rid of your fear and ego, a bigger understanding, and being blasted into the non-physical doesn't give you any additional understanding. It's just an experience without the learning, without the work that goes into making that experience yours, you see. So drugs don't help much. Now, I have had some people argue with that, and they probably are correct. They said, well, I tried drugs once, maybe twice, and it showed me that there was this big reality out there. And after that, I stopped doing the drugs and started doing meditation so I could get there on my own. Well, in that kind of a circumstance, I'd say, well, maybe that drug taking was pretty beneficial for that person, because it just was an initiator, it was an introduction to, and then they let it alone and did the work. But that's the only case I can think of. The more general case is you take the drug, you get blasted into the larger system, but it's a very random trip. Just random things happen. It's nothing that you are doing. It's not your intent. It's a random experience, and it's a big gee whiz. So that was fun. Let's do it again. And you tend to get, you can tend to get, well, I shouldn't say addicted. Maybe that's the wrong word. All these drugs are not addictive, but you get used to that. It's easy, no effort. You don't have to do any introspection. You don't have to grow. You don't have to get rid of fear. There's no hard work. But then, let's say after a while you decide that you'd like to tame this experience and actually have it to be intentional. Well, most of the people who've taken the drugs find that harder than it would have if they'd never taken the drugs, because now they don't have the patience for it. Suddenly, there's this long road ahead, and they know the shortcut sort of thing, and they just don't have the patience to do the work. it's frustrating for them to do the work. More frustrating than they can put up with. So drugs are not the way to get there. A not productive thing. You have to, if it's going to be your experience and you're going to learn from it, you have to do it yourself. Meditation aids like the binaural beats that we used at Monroe Institute, where you get something that helps entrain your brainwave. It kind of pushes you into a theta state, which is a good meditation state. That can jump you ahead maybe by months or weeks or years as far as doing your meditation, but eventually you have to take the earphones off. Eventually you have to do it on your own. Because those sorts of things can indeed help you get to a good meditation state more easily, but they also hold you there. So they'll help you get there, but they'll kind of force you into that state, but they'll kind of force you to stay there, because that's what those sounds do. They enforce a theta state EEG, and you need to go on beyond that. You need to do something other than that. So yes, they'll help you get there, and that's a good technology, to use the binaural beats. If you want to do that, go to Google and Google binaural beat. Aural for sound, and beat, and what it is two pure frequencies with a little difference between them, like say 500 and 504 hertz. 500 hertz in this ear, 504 hertz in that ear. Well, if you have sounds that are a little different, what happens is that they go in and out of phase because the frequencies are just a little different, and as they go in and out of phase, you'll hear beats. The tone will get louder and softer and louder and softer, and those beats will be at the difference frequency. So 500 and 504 would give you 4 hertz beat, which would be like wah, 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 that kind of a beat, and it would be taking place inside your head, in your brain. One frequency goes here, one frequency goes there, they meet in the corpus callosum, which is the membrane between the two hemispheres of your brain, and they actually get a beat frequency in the center of your brain, which then drives your EEG, tends to make it easy for you to put yourself into a theta state, which is a real good meditation state. Good technology, easy to do. You can go to the web, go to Google, find a site. You can create your own MP3 music file, put it on your iPod or whatever your player is, and listen to it whenever you want. Probably not a good idea to listen to it while you're driving your car, because those theta states are a little dreamy. So, but you can use that as an aid for meditation. And it's good if you're having trouble meditating, because then it'll let you get a sense of what it feels like to be in a good meditation state, which then makes it easier to accomplish because you've had an experience of it. So I do recommend things like binaural beats for beginners who are having a little trouble with getting into a good meditation state. But again, it's like training wheels on a bike. All right, you're 5 years old, you get on a bicycle, and it's got these little training wheels on either side that hold you up so you don't fall off. That's helpful. It enables you to learn to balance. But if you're going to be a good bike rider, you got to take those training wheels off one day. So you have to go without it, because they constrain your ability to really ride the bike. And that's the way the binaural beats will be. They're a constraint. First they're a help, and then they get in the way. So you need to let it go. Same with the mantras and looking at the breath and your focus. As you reach that point consciousness, you need to let them go. They're just tools. Okay. Where are we now? Next slide. Okay. The approach is everything. Fear nothing, hope for nothing. No thinking. Expect nothing. Eliminate beliefs. Don't compare. Don't judge. You see, everything we've said there about what's the right attitude is what not to do. All the things that make it difficult for you are the things that you do to inhibit the meditation process or the getting into the larger reality process. It's not that you have to learn some new clever technique that will launch you into the larger system. You have to learn to stop doing the stuff that inhibits you from meditating and getting into the larger conscious system. So it's all about not doing, not so much about doing. It's about stopping the things that you're doing that get in the way. And one of the big things that gets in your way is fear. So that's, okay, next. Okay, here's some of the experiences, the kind of things you can have. That OOBE is out-of-body experience. That's a misnomer. It has nothing to do with your body. You're not getting out of your body, you're just switching data streams. So I changed it to an OOME, which is out-of-mind experience. But that has some purgative connotations to it in English, so you're out of your mind. So, so we don't use that. I guess that's why they call it out-of-body. Lucid dreams, daydreams, night dreams too for that, precognitive dreams, remote viewing, healing, visiting other reality frames. Some of them will be physical, like some will be, let's say, tight rule sets that appear physical like this, and some of them will be very loose rule sets that are more like your dreams. Communicating with other beings, and you can do that both physical and non-physical. You can communicate with other physical beings. We can communicate with each other here just with intent. If I send you a message with my intent, you'll receive the message. You may not receive it in your intellect if you're not aware or sensitive to that, but you'll get the message just the same. So we can give messages to each other, and we can have conversations with those who are not in this reality frame. Probable future and database and the history databases. Now, if we look at all of this and we say all those things, which ones are evidential, lend themselves to being evidential? Well, it's the remote viewing and the healing, and sometimes the accessing the database. You could go to the probable future database and try to look at that and see what's likely, and then see if that comes to be, if that happens. A little harder to do, not quite so clear as remote viewing and healing. Or you could go into the past, collect information. And a lot of people will do this. They'll go to the past, collect information, maybe on a past life, maybe on something else, and then they can come back and look in the records, in the history or whatever, and see if they brought back information that actually checks out when they try to check it against history, what's been recorded. But those are a little harder to do, and the healing and the remote viewing are the simplest things and the easiest things to do. And I would say that if any of you spent 6 months working, say once a day, even if that's only for 15 or 20 minutes on your healing or your remote viewing, in 6 months, you'd probably be fairly good at it. In other words, you'd be getting it right considerably more often than you're getting it wrong. You would not be perfect at it. You'll probably never be perfect at it because there's too many variables. It's not just about you and what your intent is, but it's also about other things going on. So it's not too hard. You just have to work at it. All right, next slide. Okay, what are the constraints? We saw on that first slide all the things that you need to stop doing. Well, fear and belief and inexperience are the big ones. Okay, we've talked about fear. Fear gets in the way. Fear creates ego and belief. Most of it doesn't create all belief, but it creates a lot of belief. And inexperience. Inexperience is a very big one. It's something that gets easier and easier the more experience you have. And that's because it's very much like we talked about earlier. You're an explorer. You get to someplace new. You don't have any idea what to do, where to go, or what any of it means. And you have to figure that out just by exploring, just by going there. You have to create your own map. You can't get anybody else's map. You have to create your own map. Okay. Most of us tend to think of the non-physical as just a funny version of the physical. We have our habits of thinking and our beliefs about the way reality works, and we expect the non-physical to be just like this, but stranger. And that's not true. It's not like that. So if you don't really understand, you don't have that experience, you tend to extrapolate what you know into what you don't know. Okay. So when you go there, you find parks to walk in, you find, everybody lives in a house, all the kind of things that are here, you extrapolate there, and you do that because you're interpreting the data. The way you interpret the data is in ways that are familiar with you here. Well, you can't help that. That's how you're going to interpret the data. It's not like, oh, don't do that. You're going to do that. You're going to have to do that because that's how you interpret data. Remember, you started as a free will awareness unit that had no intellectual component, and everything in your intellect you gathered from experience here. And that's what you have to work with. So you are going to interpret it in that way. Realize that that will change with experience. The more experience you have, those forms will start to disappear. And you won't be interpreting everything in terms of just your experience in the physical, because now you'll start to gain experience in the non-physical, and those interpretations will get better with time. But in the beginning, you will see and hear and smell and interact with things very much like you're here. So it is going to be like this physical reality, but weirder. More like a dream reality. So a dream reality is like that, right? In the dreams, a lot of stuff's very physical, just like it is here. You have all the same stuff there that you have here. It's just strange because it disappears, reappears, and suddenly you're, in a certain situation, but still your situations are all very physical because that's the nature of your dream reality. Your larger reality explorations are going to be like that at first. That's where skepticism comes in. Instead of saying, oh, I went into the larger reality and I, met these people and they lived in this nice little house and, they walked their dog and we had a nice conversation. You need to be skeptical about that house and, walking the dog thing. That wasn't important. You'll also find that in this reality, of course, it's about the stuff, about things to a large extent. And in the larger reality, it's about relationship. It's about connections. The stuff is really not important to the point that it's non-existent. Mostly it's just connections. It's sharing data with other entities. It's getting information. And all the stuff you see is the stuff that you're making up and adding to it. So it's very relationship, interaction focused, not stuff focused. You see, here we're very stuff focused. As an example, there's if we were going to describe this room, okay, we could describe this room from two different directions. We could describe it from an objective viewpoint. Okay, the color of the carpet, it's red and black with green, the walls, the little trim that goes around it, the ceiling tiles, how warm or cold it is, so that sort of thing. We could just make a list of everything in here, where it was, what its color was, its texture, how much did it weigh, what were the dimensions of the room. That's the objective view. And that's the view that science tells you is real. Okay, the objective view. And if you were in this room and you looked around and you went out and you met a scientist in there and you said, yeah, I've been in that room, and he'd say, prove it. And you'd tell him, well, it has exactly 74 chairs. The chairs are red, the rug's like this, the drapes are green. And he'd say, yeah, you've been in the room because you got the list of what's in there. It's only the objective things. But there's a subjective way of looking at this room too. And that's by feeling, what's the ambience? What's it feel like? What's the functionality? What's your attachment to it? Well, this was a room where I had a good time, or I learned a lot of things, or I had a terrible time, or whatever. Something that it means to you personally. This is your subjective sense of this room. And your subjective sense of this room has nothing to do with the color, the dimensions, the number of chairs. It has to do with the people who were there, the experiences you had. You walk into sometimes a nice restaurant that has ambience, that it just feels nice walking into the environment. There's art, everything is so well done. That's the sort of thing you remember, not the color of the carpet, but the ambience. You see, that's the subjective view of the room. And if you were out of a room and a scientist said, prove to me you were in that room, and you gave him all the ambience and your sense of it and your feeling of the function and how you interacted there, he'd say, nonsense, you've never been in that room. You see, that doesn't count. Well, when you're in the larger consciousness system, what you get is the ambience. What you get is the connection. What you get is the information and what that means to you. That's the way it is, 98% of the time. 98% of what you experience is that way. It's not the stuff. But we, in our habits and ways of thinking, we want to see stuff. Because that's the real stuff, you see. And then we're kind of spinning our wheels, wasting our time trying to see what the color of the rug is and how many chairs were in the room, when all of that's irrelevant. And the larger consciousness system in the data stream you're getting into really isn't interested in that, you see. That kind of stuff is just here because we have this tight rule set. It's just there for us to interact with, give us feedback. When you're out there, this is not there, but you tend to want to put it there. You want to see that, so you interpret it sometimes as being there. Bob Monroe talked about a park that he went to relax in, this wonderful park and the shade and the trees and all this sort of thing. And then people after that all wanted to go see his park, you see. This is a reflection of Bob Monroe, not a reflection that the larger conscious system has parks in it, you see, because somebody else's park may not be green grass and trees and a little lake. Somebody else's park may be, a desert with cactus, or sitting in a rowboat in the middle of the lake, or flying a glider plane at 20,000 feet, That's somebody else's kind of relaxing experience. So it's the ambience, it's connection, it's how it feels, it's how you're interacting. That's what you'll find in the larger consciousness system, but you're going to interpret a lot of other things in it too. You're going to find a being that you're talking to, and initially you want all the detail. What does this being look like? What color is his eyes? What color is his hair? How's he dressed? All these things you want to put into the picture. Eventually you let all that go, and if somebody says, well, you've talked to this person a lot, what do they look like? And you go, oh, I don't know. There's no interest in what does it look like, because that's irrelevant. These are the objective details that are not relevant. And you will find that mostly these objective details are not in your data stream. When you're out in the larger conscious system, you tend to put them in there yourself. So that's a thing as you experience. Be skeptical of what you get, particularly if you're getting objective detail. Pay attention to the feeling, to the connection, to the information, to the ambience. Okay. Yes, you have to interpret everything in terms of your experience here as a free will awareness unit. And again, that experience is limited to here. Because you, the free will awareness unit, chunk of consciousness, is the one that's going out to experience. So you're stuck with that as your base. So if you are out experiencing the larger consciousness system, and that your house catches on fire, somebody throws a bucket of cold water on you, you will instantly come back because that's your base. That's home base, is here in this physical reality. That's what this free will awareness unit is, that's the data stream that you're starting with. So you're branching from there and going out. You're not just leaving this and going someplace else. You're still connected here, and from here you're branching out to explore other things. But you're still here. All right. You'll find that in the larger conscious system, you don't have to worry about language. It's like, well, how can I talk to this person? What language do they speak? There is no language. We speak with telepathy. We speak with thoughts. And when you speak with telepathy and with thoughts, you speak in terms of concepts and ideas. It's not strings of letters making up words. That's our language. It's the way we have language here. It's just whole thoughts, whole paragraphs in one lump. So you trade information, you're going to get it in packets of paragraphs, if you will. So you get a whole thought, not linearly, not linearly, but all at once. And sometimes you'll get a whole chapter. Sometimes a lot will come at once. But you can always interact. You don't have to just take what you get and go on. You're interactive. You can say, what was that again? Could you give me that in smaller pieces? Would you please repeat that? I'm not sure I got it. And what does that mean? Now, we talked earlier about the fact that we trade metaphors, right? And symbols. Our words and our letters are symbols. So symbols and metaphors is what we do. That's how we communicate. Well, it's the same when it's telepathic and you're getting these chunks. You're going to get metaphors and symbols. We also said that if you're trading information with somebody who has had a lot of your same experiences, who's in your same culture, maybe somebody you grew up with, and maybe somebody you're good friends with, it's so much easier because you have the same metaphors, you have the same symbols, you're kind of on the same page there. Whereas if you, and I think the example I used before, if we pluck somebody up out of the middle of the Amazon jungle that's never been out of the jungle and we try to communicate with them, it's really hard because we don't share very many metaphors. Even if we had the language was the same, we still have a real hard time understanding each other because we don't use the same metaphors. We haven't learned the meanings of the same symbols. Well, what if you meet somebody that's non-physical? That's always been in that sort of reality. Has never been here, maybe never been in a virtual reality with a tight rule set like this. How many times more difficult than that is somebody plucked out of the Amazon jungle? At least there you have the physical reality in common. Here you have almost nothing in common. And you're going to talk in terms of metaphors. See how hard that is? It takes a little time to develop that, and you have to ask a lot of questions. And the metaphors you get will be metaphors that you interpret. You'll get something as a whole paragraph. You have to interpret that in your mind before you can think about it. You have to put it in terms of language. Your language, which is based on physical reality, metaphors, and symbols. So you're seeing it's not just like you're going to go out there and talk to somebody, then you and he are going to just be on the same wavelength. It'll be perfectly clear. Sometimes it might be that way. Sometimes it might be somebody else who's traveling around out there from here, and your metaphors will be similar. Sometimes it will be entities that are very familiar with your metaphors. Sometimes it'll be really hard to make that connection. Practice, patience, keep trying, keep working at it, and it will clear up. You'll tend to get it after a while. Be skeptical. Remember, you also are a creator. You have an imagination, and you can add data to that stream. So you see, I'm painting a picture with a lot of uncertainty in it. Don't think that it's a certain thing. Don't think that getting into the non-physical is like taking a trip, to London or New York or Sydney, Australia. Oh, let's get in the plane and we'll go off into the non-physical and we'll get out of the plane and there it'll all be. I'll find a good restaurant, I'll make friends and I'll do this. It's not going to be like that. It's not that straightforward. Okay. So the fear, belief, and inexperience are the primary constraints that keep you from experiencing what is actually there. That is the content of the data that you're receiving. It won't keep you from experiencing anything. You still will experience. It'll just keep you from experiencing the actual content of the data that's there. So you have to always remain open-minded and always remain skeptical, and in time you will learn to do better at comprehending and understanding. All right, so just being aware that what you see isn't necessarily what you get or what's there, that'll be very helpful. All right, next slide. Okay, what you'll find there, and I think we've just been talking about this somewhat, what you're going to find there has, in some parts of it, it's going to be your own influence, right? Your own interpretation, your own way of seeing things. And you can't help that. It's just going to be that way. So you're going to influence a lot of what you get. And I have this little set of experiences that Bob Monroe had in his books. I don't know how many of you read Bob Monroe's books. But in Bob's books, he talks about not returning. He was out of body, and he was trying to get back, and he ran into this big wall. And he couldn't get over it, he couldn't get around it, he couldn't get under it, he was stuck. Oh no, fear. Now what am I going to do? I can't get back. And many people, when they first do out of body, have this fear. What happens if I can't get back? You see, that's just your fear. That wall was Bob Monroe's fear that he couldn't get back. That's why he ran into that wall. He had this little fear, and he'd been out of body a lot of times, but he had this little fear in the back of his mind that, I'm not so sure about this. What if I don't get back? Well, that fear was manifested into a wall that he had to deal with. The thing that gets you, the boogeyman under the bed, right, when you're 4 or 5 years old. And in this, Bob Monroe came to I guess it was like a wall or a surface or a barrier that had a big hole in it. And he said, that's interesting. So he stuck his hand in the wall to see what was on the other side, and something grabbed him. Something got him. It's, oh no, Well, that's the fear of the unknown. That's the fear of the boogeyman that lives in your closet at night. That's the fear. You'll create that. That's why I say, get rid of your fears first before you go, or you'll have to deal with them there if you don't deal with them here. And dealing with them there can be a scary experience and make it so you don't want to go back. Yes, going somewhere. People report in their near-death experiences that they suddenly become awake in a tunnel, and they have to move through the tunnel toward the light. Well, does that mean that the larger conscious system is full of tunnels? No. Why do they see themselves in a tunnel? Because to get somewhere, they have to move. That's their belief. And if they're going to move, they need some background to be moving relative to. You see, if you're going to move, the way you tell you're moving is that stuff's going by you. I'm walking this direction. I can tell I'm doing that because the scenery is going from in front of me to next to me to behind me. Well, if they don't have a background which shows their relative motion, then they can't move because they have a belief that you have to move to get somewhere. In the larger conscious system, you teleport. That's just another metaphor, of course. You teleport because you're just switching data streams. Your intent takes you to a different place, different data stream, different reality frame. Your intent is what drives everything. And you don't have to move to go someplace. People, when they first go out of body, they fly like Superman. You know, they stretch out and fly, because that's the way Superman flies, so that's the way they fly. And of course, it's totally unnecessary. You don't have to fly, you don't have to walk, you don't move, you just change your intent, you're there. You're switching data streams. Often people have the experience of the white light. They're there, and suddenly this beam of great white light that, you know, is blinding and so on, and they have this feeling of being very, very small and humble, and this, they feel love, they feel connection, they're connected to the whole, you know, to the whole universe and everything there, and suddenly they feel they're one with all, they're a part of everything, and it is a very powerful, moving experience. What they're experiencing is an awareness of the larger consciousness system. Now, if they're very religious, they've just met God. If they're sort of religious but not very religious, they just met Gabriel, the angel. If they are religious in the East, they just met the great guru. You see, they can interpret that however they like, and all those interpretations are fine. They're all metaphors. They met something that was a whole lot greater than they were, and they feel integrated. And that's a life-changing experience. And some of the NDEs, NDEs, is that right? Yeah, the ones that almost die but don't, near-death experience, NDEs. Some of them get this experience, and it is often a life-changing experience. Well, you can have that experience, and if you wander around in the non-physical enough, you probably will have that experience, but you can have it when you want to, if you like, that integrated experience as one. And at that point, they tell you they feel like they know everything, they're connected to everything, they're one with everything, they're a part of it. They are the whole is them. And the love is so pervasive that it's just mind-boggling, you see. So that's a common experience. Many people do that, and it's a good metaphor. You see the silver cord metaphor there on the list. If you look at out-of-body experiences, which were then called astral projection back in the 1800s, several books, Muldoon and Carrington, one by a physician named Fox, several others. Everybody who went out of body was connected to their body with a silver cord. Bob Monroe didn't have a silver cord. What happened to his silver cord? Well, the reason for silver cords was because people had a belief that the soul or the etheric body or the energy body or the bioenergy or whatever we want to call it these days, inhabits the body, and it leaves the body, and it's kind of the, you know, the soul, the essence, the whatever of the body. And if it left the body entirely, the body would just shrivel and die without it, because it's the life force inside the body. So you can't have it not connected to the body, and the soul has to be connected to a body, otherwise it just floats off into, you know, soul land or never never land, or goes to heaven, or whatever souls do that aren't connected to bodies, you see, and it would be gone. So it would be a disaster if this disconnection between this astral body and the body was complete. You know, if it was just a complete disconnection, a disaster. Both the soul and the body would, you know, be in trouble, be a bad thing. So they have to stay connected. So we have a silver cord. So the silver cord is a metaphor that satisfies a belief that's attached to a fear. See? So that's where the silver cord comes from. Most people doing out of body today don't have silver cords, but many of them still do. It depends on whether or not you believe that that whatever that out-of-body body is, that it's connected to a physical body. And that this connection has to be maintained. So that cord was like the air hose for the diver. You know, the deep sea diver under the water has to have the air hose, otherwise disaster strikes. You can't survive. So that's where the silver cord came from, and it's still around. And again, the specific being depends on you, your metaphors, your beliefs, your fears. You're going to paint that world in terms of your own inside beliefs and fears. That's because that's how you're going to interpret the data you get. This interpretation process works like, it's called, you have pictures in your mind, ideas and concepts, and you do a pattern match to those concepts. So you get some data, you go into your history, your own experience base, and say, what do I have in here that best fits what I just got? So you're getting data from a very wise person that seems to know lots of things, so you go into your database, and that becomes the angel Gabriel, or it becomes a prophet, or it becomes your guru, or something like that, because that's in your database fits the data that you're getting. You see, it's a pattern matching. And when we do pattern matching is not necessarily an exact sort of thing. You go in and get the closest pattern match that you can. And sometimes that closest pattern match isn't really too close, but there isn't anything there any closer, so that's what you use. You're experiencing now out in the larger consciousness system, you should expect to get a lot of things for which you have no experience in your collection of patterns to describe that. So you're going to have trouble, and you're going to be pulling out patterns that maybe are only a 10% fit, but that's the pattern you have, and that's what you're going to see. So you see, experience is important. All right. That's why we have the Hindus, they see chakras. And the chakras, of course, are identified with the body. These are metaphors. There are no chakras in a body. This is only a virtual body, you see. Now the rule set, of course, has this virtual body. It's an electromechanical device. It does have fields, has all this stuff, but it's just calculations. Well, what about these chakras? They're tools, but they're very useful tools. It's a way you can take the information and the data and categorize it. It's very difficult to communicate with people if you just say, here's all the information, you just dump this big pile of data on them. Go make sense of it. Doesn't work. So you take the data and you break it into subsets and say, well, here's a part that kind of refers to this, and here's a part that is more like this, and here's something that answers these kinds of questions and deals with these sorts of things. You break it up into pieces so that you can explain it, so other people can understand it. And because you believe that the body is fundamental and the core of all reality, you then attach it to the body. Because if it isn't attached to something physical, then how could it possibly be real? Because the physical is really what's really real. So you have this kind of a attitude that ends up making the body connected to these things that are non-physical. And it's good tools. We need tools. We need the data to be sorted and broken into pieces that we can deal with more easily. Okay, there's the root chakra, and it deals with these kinds of things in these kinds of ways. And then there's the crown chakra, and it deals with whole different kinds of things with different kinds of ways. And if you didn't break it into pieces, it would be a lot harder to understand. So these tool sets are valuable for us. They help us understand. But you have to realize they're just metaphors. They're ways of seeing the data. So they're not fundamental. If they were fundamental, the Zen monks would have to see chakras too, and so would the shaman, and so would everybody else, because they're fundamental, and everybody's going to see them because that's what's there. Well, everybody doesn't see them. This culture sees them because that's part of the way this culture interprets the data. And if you're part of that culture, that's the way you see them too, because that's your pattern, and that's how you interpret things. So it's not that these things are just imaginary and you should just leave them alone and forget about them. They're not important. They're valuable. valuable tools that help us see things. The beams of light that we use when we heal, an intense beam of white light that gets rid of that black stuff. Well, the light is a metaphor. The black stuff is a metaphor. Gingerbread cookies is a metaphor. All of it's metaphors, tools to help you focus your intent on what you're trying to do. Because most people, if you say, oh, you don't need any of those tools, just say heal. Have your intent for it to heal, and that's all you need to do, because the rest of it's just metaphors you don't need. Most people can't do that. It's not effective. They can't, they can't function that way because it doesn't seem real to them. It seems too easy. It's like Tinkerbell using the little wand, to do magic. And it doesn't feel right to do magic. You actually have to do something. You got to see something. Some people can't just use a light beam to do things. They have to go in and actually do surgery. They have to do hands-on. They have to go in and cut out the pieces. Take those pieces and, get rid of them. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Other people can't heal unless they actually can lay their hands on you, touch you. Some work if they have a piece of your hair or some part of you like that. They can connect with you with that, but without that, they can't connect with you. See, these are all tools that people use to focus their mind. You don't need any of those tools, theoretically, but we all need those tools because we're not at that point yet where we can just say, heal, done. That's too hard because we just don't believe it. We don't believe it ourselves. I can't work. I haven't done anything. And because we don't believe it, it doesn't work. And we can't do that. We have to have process. We have to see things, and then we have to get rid of them. We have to change things because nothing's going to happen if we don't change something. You see how all of that's just process, metaphor, to help us think, to help us have an intention. All right. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, this slide was I think we've talked about it a little bit already. When you go into some place you've never been before, it's very much like a blind man who was abducted from the rural Appalachian Mountains. Those are some mountains in the U.S. that are very, very rural, very remote, often no electricity, no running water, back the way things were in maybe the 1700s or something. And you suddenly drop them in the middle of a big city, and they're blind. No social services, nobody to help them. They don't have the right metaphors and concepts to get along there. And what happens? What do you do if that's you? How do you deal with that? Well, you have to explore. You go out one step at a time to find out what your environment is like. And after you've taken a step and you find out, oh, there's a tree here. Well, it's really a telephone pole, but there's a tree. And then you go back to where you were. Now you have a map. I'm here, there's a tree there. There's a map. Now maybe you take a step in another direction, you see? And you just do that. You interact with people, you make connections, and eventually you can live there. Eventually you make a map, you make enough connections, you figure things out, you get housing, you find a way to get foods, you get a job, it works out, but it takes a long time. And you just have to start one step at a time. And it's patience. And this is the same sort of way you have to get into the larger conscious system. You'll have no idea what's there, how it works, and you just have to go explore and make a map. Now, you think, well, I'll take a shortcut. I'll read Bob Monroe's book, and I'll have his map. Well, then you can go sit in his park. You see, now you're trying to have somebody else's experience. If you just read a book about it, and you want to and say, that's the map, I can read, there's lots of people go out of body and write books about all the experiences they had. You go read the book, and now you can try to have their experience. Their experience is based on their pattern matching, based on their fear, their knowledge base, their experience, And if you read those books with a lot of skepticism and don't read the literal lines, but read between the lines, right? Pick up on the ambience and the meaning and the connections rather than how big was the room and what were the color of the drapes, then you can get something out of those books. But most people don't do that. Most people pick up, what color were the drapes and, what's the size of the room and how many heads did the being have and so on, and then they miss the point. So you see, you can't really have anybody else's experience but your own. Trying to have somebody else's experience will just waste your time. There's probably tens of thousands of people who are trying to go out of body, and they read Bob Monroe's book, and he says, well, I lie down, I get relaxed, I feel a pulsation, I just roll out of body. And there's all these people lying there going, trying to roll out of body. Am I out of body yet? No, it didn't work. Well, that's because that was Bob Monroe. That was his metaphor, you see, was rolling out of body. If you try to use his metaphor, it may not work so well for you because that was his metaphor. Other people, they do some really interesting things. Sometimes they imagine there's a rope hanging down and they reach up and they pull themselves up a rope to get out of body. Some just get an arm out and they look at their arm and they say, is this my arm or is that the out-of-body arm? You see, and they've got all the stuff that you can learn in out-of-body classes to do. But all of these are metaphors and ways that they have found that they can trick their intent into attaching to a different data stream. Well, it's much easier if you just have an intent to attach to a different data stream, and it's just, you can skip all that. It's not necessary. But you have to sort of know what that data stream is. What data stream are you attaching to? And you've never been anywhere, how do you know what to intend to do? See, that's the blind man's problem. He's in New York or Paris or London, and he doesn't know what's in any direction. You just have to explore, and you can always ask for help. You can always say, larger consciousness system, I'd like to go experience something that would be useful to my growth and help my understanding about what I'm doing and what this reality is all about, and be open. Very high probability that you will have an experience. You'll go someplace. And when you do, now that's a data stream you can have an intent to connect to. And there it is, you'll have it. So now you're like the blind man, you've taken one step, you've found a tree, that's a telephone pole. And now you can always go back to that tree. You know it's right over there. And you can have an intention to go there, and you take a step, and there it is. You see, now that's yours. You have one thing on your map. That's how you map out the larger consciousness system. Okay, open-minded skepticism. Absolutely important. Next slide. Okay, what about the people you meet there? Guides. People have guides. This is maybe a little new agey, but people who interact in the larger conscious system will often have interactions with beings that are reoccurring, and they tend to call these beings guides. Okay, now what is a guide? A guide is your personal interface with the larger consciousness system. It's just an interface with the larger conscious system. When you talk to the larger conscious system, or when you go out there to say something, then you have this interface, and it's a personal interface. And guides get use the word bubbled up, but guides get created to serve that function, just like we get created to serve this function. So it's just another expression of this larger consciousness system, and it's there to help us out if we pay attention. And now I tell everybody that you can have a guide if you want, because you can have an intent to have an interface, and you can get an interface. But then when I tell people that, they say, my guides won't talk to me. I try to talk to my guides. I try to make a connection with them, but they don't say anything. They won't talk to me. I can't, What is it? I need new guides. My guides aren't doing a good job. And the reason that your guides may not talk to you is that talking is at an intellectual level. your guides may not want to make an interface, a connection with you at the intellectual level. Why? Because your intellectual level is dominated by fear and ego. And interacting with your fear and ego is just not productive. Okay. They may want to interact with you at the being level, but at the being level, you're not necessarily aware of it. So you think they're not connecting with you at all. Then that means you have to connect intuitively, right? And this intuition connection is kind of squishy, wishy-washy, and we're not quite sure whether that's working or not. So it's kind of not very satisfying. The solution is to get rid of the fear, get rid of the ego to where that's not a problem, and then you can chat with your guide, because the guide won't mind talking to you, because they're not going to trigger ego and fear. They'll be talking directly with your being level. So that's the thing about guides. They're there, they're available. It's just a matter of having an intent to interact and being able to open yourself to the information. And you do that the same way you open yourself to the information about where the black spots are. You just tell your intellect to sit down and be quiet, and you open yourself, you get what you get. And in the beginning, it'll seem like you're not getting much, or you get things and you question it. Just do it. Don't judge it, just do it. 6 months later, judge it. Eventually, you have to pull that intellect in and say, am I wasting my time, or I'm getting something out of this? But you don't in the beginning, just do it. Okay. Instead of guides, some people talk to their higher self. That's another metaphor. A guide is a metaphor. Higher self's a metaphor. We have to try not to make these into specific things. You see, if we realize they're just metaphors, then we won't get lost in them. If we think they are physical things, physical, non-physical things, you see, then we confuse ourselves. We want to make them physical, non-physical things, because that's what we're used to dealing with. But we just let them be metaphors for a connection to the larger consciousness system. And that's less restrictive. Okay, next slide. Okay, how do you do this? You do it by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. What's that mean? It means you have to develop your own experience set, develop your own expertise. An athlete has to pull themselves up with their own bootstraps. What does that mean? It means they train, they practice, and they keep practicing, and they get better. They get faster, they get stronger, they get whatever they need to do what they're doing. But you just keep working at it. And it's not like Shazam, all of at once, they were running 10-minute miles, they get up today and they run a 5-minute mile. It doesn't work like that. It's just little tiny increments at a time. One little tiny piece adds to the next tiny little piece, and after 2 or 3 years of training, you can run a marathon. You can run 25 miles without stopping, but you have to work at it. And it's not a great leap forward, it's a tiny little increment as you practice. And that's the way it is here. You have to pull yourself up with the bootstraps. It's an iterative process of adding tiny increments of understanding. So tiny that you don't notice. When you're running or lifting weights or balancing things or juggling or whatever it is you're trying to do, you notice that in the beginning nothing seems to work. And the next day it still doesn't work. And the next day it still doesn't work. And then one day it works just a little bit, but not much, you see, and that's kind of the process. So that's why it takes patience. It's a bootstrapping process that requires a lot of patience and a lot of stick-to-itiveness. You got to keep doing it. The results are long-term. This is a life's work, getting rid of fear. It's not a week's work or a year's work. It's a life's work. So take the long view. Okay, next slide. talked about this. The big thing you need to do is lower your entropy, get rid of your fear, become love. Everything else then gets easy. Do that first, and the rest of it comes easily. If you don't do that first, the rest of it's a struggle. So at least do that while you're working on the rest of it, because that will speed up your process. That's how you get ready. Okay. The larger consciousness system and you as a piece of it have a purpose. And everything you do and everything it does should be informed by that purpose. Okay, next slide. Okay. Now, let's assume that you can get into the larger consciousness system. The next question is, okay, I'm here. I'm at point consciousness. I've let go of this physical reality data stream. I'm just a point of awareness, point of consciousness floating in the void. I am. It's all my whole world, my whole reality is just I am. Okay, now what? Okay, now what do I do? Well, you can do things, you can just fly around because it's fun. It's fun to fly, you can go out and fly through the city and around the buildings, sort of like Superman and Spider-Man all together, and you can do things like that. And that's entertaining, but you're not going to grow much from it. You can see what the view's like from the top of Mount Everest. You can do all sorts of things, but mostly they're just entertaining. You can go back in that historical database and search for, your favorite characters. See what was going on there. Ask them questions if you like. But all that's mostly just entertainment, you see. So you have to have a sense, well, okay, I get there, what am I going to do? What is this about? And it's not about entertainment. You have to think about that before you go, because you'll get there and you won't know what to do. You can just float there. That's very nice. You can just float there and enjoy it. It's very relaxing. You'll come back with more energy. You'll feel good. It'll be a good rest. And for a lot of people, that's enough. Okay? For a lot of people, that's enough. In some Eastern traditions, that's the goal. That's nirvana. You just get there and float in the void. Bliss. No worries, no problems, nothing, because you've let go of all of that. The physical reality is gone. Just you floating in the void. So you can just hang there with bliss. Or you can see that as a doorway to your exploration. But you need purpose, and you need focus, and you need to have some idea of what you want to do and why you want to do it. And if you do that, and if the reasons for why you want to do something have something to do with lowering your entropy and growing up, you'll find the system very willing to help you. If you want to be entertained, you can do that, but the system isn't going to go out of its way to entertain you. It's not an entertainment system. It's a lower your entropy system. So it depends on what you want to do. So that's something, I can't give you that. You have to develop that on your own. So I'm not going to tell you when you get there what it is you should be thinking about. That has to come out of you and what you want out of this experience. So that's something, though, to think. And that will maybe make your experience or this whole process a little more sober and a little more, what am I doing? Is this just because I want to zoom around? Or I just want to experience it and see that it's real and then I can go home? Or how will I know it's real? What do I have to do? Flying around the city or flying around the Alps, will that be enough? Or, well, there's no evidence there. I could have just imagined that. What do I need to do? And why am I here? It's a question you have to answer. And you may not have the answer to that right away. That answer may develop and it may change with time. But you have to be thinking about that in the background. Next slide. Gaining access. And we started out saying everybody can gain access if you want. It's your right as consciousness to have access to this larger consciousness system. For the most part, it's self-policing. Those people that have a whole lot of fear have a lot of trouble getting access, which is a good thing because they really shouldn't be there. They really don't need to be there. That fear will bite them when they get there. They will probably find something worse than a wall that keeps them from coming back. They'll find something else that will get them. So if you have a lot of fear, it's hard to go. And lots of times the system will test you, the level of your fear. You'll start this out-of-body thing, and something will happen to you that will frighten you, whether it's a three-headed boogeyman that goes boo, or whether your body starts oscillating like a rubber band and you feel electric shocks going through your system, loud noises roaring in your ears, all sorts of things will happen. And most of that is just a fear test. If when that happens, you go, ah, and run back to your body, right? I want to go home, mama. Then you're not ready. So that's typical. People do that. And the system kind of polices itself. If you have too much fear, you don't need to be here. So expect to have some scary experiences if you're a novice to this, because that's your fear test. But you need to pass that fear test. You need to have this attitude that I want to have this experience. I need to know what this reality is like, if this is what you're feeling. And whatever happens, I'll meet it. I'll deal with it. Two-headed monster with big teeth runs up, I'll say, hi, how are you today? Bonjour. You know, you'll deal with it. You won't be fearful. Even if you're sure it's going to kill you on the spot. You'll say, that's all right. It's all right with me. I'm here. I'm not gonna be fearful. I'm not gonna have that reaction to it. And if you do, then of course that three-headed monster will just go away and smoke. And you'll say, oh, how about that? I got that one all right, you know? Then you'll get another one until you've kind of passed the fear tests, and after that they go away and you don't have to do fear tests anymore. But if it frightens you and you run back, then you're not really ready. So it takes courage, because you will have some fear to deal with. If you have any of that fear, you'll have to deal with it there. Okay. All right, we've talked about all of this. Yeah, it's just fundamental that you start to see yourself. You begin to sense yourself as a consciousness, not a body. If you start seeing yourself as a consciousness, I'm this consciousness, and what I do is I make choices, but I'm constrained to make the choices within this virtual reality. Okay? So that's me. I'm a piece of consciousness making choices, and my job is to lower my entropy and become love. This body thing is just my tool in which I can go make these choices. It defines the choices I have to make. It limits them. It's the constraint on the way I make choices and the way I interact with other people. But what I am is a piece of consciousness, and I've got a mission here. You see yourself that way rather than, I am this body. You know, this is me, this flesh and blood, and so on. It's a different perspective. And just that change of perspective will make it easier for you to explore the larger consciousness system. Just how you see yourself. The way you think about reality will be a big help. Okay, next slide. Okay. The title of that one kind of says it all. Everything you've read about the non-physical, forget about it. That's somebody else's metaphor, somebody else's pattern match, somebody else's experience. You can read between the lines and get a sense of it. That's helpful, but don't take it literally. Until it's your experience, it's not your truth. Don't try to take on somebody else's experience as your own. Okay. Other than that, yeah, I always like to point out that next to the last bullet, because that makes everybody feel so good. Take the long view. In 20 years, you should be good at this. Yeah. Okay, that's worked us up to a break. And let's take that 15-minute break, and we'll come back and do the rest.